This is a Geek Leader. Hey you guys, John Rauda back again with episode 52 of A Geek Leader, and today on the show we've got Tom Cooper. Tom Cooper was the founder of BrightHill Group. They're a consulting company, does coaching, he gives speeches, he does classes on communication and leadership and several other things. And recently I heard him give a talk on the 4 levels of thinking as a geek leader. And of course, the title of that talk couldn't fit any better with our podcast than being a geek leader. So I had to have him on, and he came very well prepared. He had lots of good information, including a link that we can go to that's in the show notes to take you to his site with an ebook that he gives you for free on budgeting for leadership, as well as a handout that you can print out about the 4 levels of thinking as a geek leader. It's a really good episode packed with lots and lots of good information, and I highly recommend you guys listen to it all the way through, and then go follow Tom on Twitter and LinkedIn and check out all the good content that he's putting out there as well. And again, give it up for Tom Cooper. And we're live. I've got Tom Cooper here with me. And Tom, you recently did a talk about thinking as a geek leader, and I want to talk a little bit about that. But before we get into that, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your history and kind of what you're doing now?
Absolutely. So once upon a time, there was this young geek who was trying to figure out how to be more effective in the work that he did. And day after day, he worked on software and IT projects. And day after day, he found that the projects didn't quite work out the way he hoped. And it was a struggle and a frustration. He began to try and figure out what could it be that was the differentiator between successful projects and unsuccessful projects. And it didn't seem to be that it was related to the quality of the people on the project. It didn't seem to be knowledge. It didn't seem to be the business problem. There was something else, that capability that was elusive. And one day he discovered, quite by accident, that it had to do with the ability to influence others. That we focus so much on the technical stuff, but not on the people stuff. A lot of times as geeks, and I'm definitely a geek, we focus on the technology stuff, and we're great at that, but we're not so great at the people side of things. And so that's really what drove me to start to think differently and behave differently in the work that I did. And so I continued in an IT career for many years. And then for the last several years, I've been working as a trainer and an executive coach, particularly focused on highly technical experts, geeks. How do we be better at getting stuff done?
Well, you're talking to the right audience then. So you gave this talk about 4 levels of thinking as a geek leader, which I really like the concept of this, because it's something that I don't think a lot of people talk about, your mindset and the way people think, and how that has to change as you evolve in your leadership journey. So I'd like to hear a little bit about what you have to say about these different levels of thinking as a geek leader.
Yeah, thanks for asking me about that. It's something I'm really passionate about, because it occurred to me that early in my career, I believed, and I fervently believed this, that I was the person who brought value, that when it came to getting stuff done, I was the man. I was the guy who made it happen. It was my brain and my 2 hands. And all you need to do is just tell me what the problem is and get out of the way. And I really, the worst part about that was that early in my career, that worked. I remember I got out of school and I knew some stuff about some stuff, and then I started pouring my attention into some things. And the more I poured my attention into becoming technically proficient, the more success I had. And that was terrific up to a point. Because I remember very clearly at one point in my career, I said to my boss, "Hey, I'm the smartest guy in the room about this technology. I show up early, I stay late, I work hard, I'm delivering value. How come I'm not getting promoted?" And he looked at me and he said, "Tom, you're doing a fantastic job in the role you're in. Why would I promote you?"
Oh yeah, that's one thing a lot of people don't realize is when you promote someone from within, it adds more complications to the business. You have to rehire that person, and hopefully you get someone as good as that person. And what you're being promoted to is usually a different skill set than where you are now.
That's right. And it's an interesting challenge, because we see this all the time. We complain about our bosses. We say our bosses are bozos. They're idiots. They don't know what they're doing. I can't imagine I had one guy say to me, if my boss weren't here, I don't know how that coffee cup would move from one office to another. Wow. And I think the challenging thing is we see somebody who's a standout performer. I was working in Fortune 500 for a long time. And the way that people got to leadership positions there was they successfully delivered a project. That if they could implement the technology, once just getting the technology implemented, that was enough for them to get promoted to that next level. And so whether it was manager or director or senior director, it was how can I get through this and deliver this project? Now, unfortunately, there was not a measurement of how many dead bodies were left behind on the journey for the projects. And I think that's really problematic because we take these people who are highly capable individual contributors, we put them into a role where they're overseeing a team of people, and we don't equip them with the right skill set, and then they don't do a very good job. 60% of managers fail or underperform in their first 2 years in position.
Yeah, I'm in that 60% for sure. I know when they promoted me, it was more like, oh, you're a good engineer, you're a good developer. We're going to move you and make you in charge of the people that you're good at working with. And it was a train wreck. I was so heads down and focused on trying to do code and not stepping back away from doing the code. That I ended up having the highest turnover rate in the company for a couple of years.
Oof.
It was
Ouch.
just a nightmare.
Ouch.
So yeah, I feel you for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because we as humans we have the capacity to think about thinking. Other creatures have the capacity to think, but no other creatures have the ability to be self-actualized and think about themselves and also to think about thinking, which gets really meta. But the point is to say that we need to think about our thinking. We need to think about, am I applying the right model to this problem? If you remember the Hurricane Katrina that hit, it was devastating, and FEMA came in and tried to make an impact, and they really struggled, and it was a big kind of hit on President Bush because FEMA just wasn't able to move the needle in that space, and they brought in somebody who had been involved with the Coast Guard and put him in charge of that particular effort, and they asked him what was it that was effective in moving the needle there. And he said the problem was they were using the wrong mental model. They were using the mental model of what happens if there's a hurricane. And if there's a hurricane, there's a small swath of utter destruction. But everything on the left or the right of the hurricane's path is fine. But in this situation, he said it was more like the weapon of mass effect because after the hurricane came the floods because the levees and dikes and dams failed. And so they had all this flooding. And so it was really, he said it was more like a weapon of mass effect. And so instead of being a narrow corridor of destruction, it was a wide swath of destruction. Well, you can imagine if you brought the mental model that said all we got to do is get this middle piece straightened out, you would be bringing the wrong mental model.
Right.
And the same point applies to our role as technologists and geek leaders, that if we bring the wrong mental model to the problem, the wrong pattern to the problem, we're going to get the wrong outcome. And that's exactly what you described. Right? I'm recognized and rewarded because I'm an individual who's very smart, who gets assigned hard problems and solves hard problems. That's what I do. And then they put you in a role as a leader, and now your measurement is entirely different. Your measurement of success is not about your personal output, but it's about your ability to facilitate the output of others. And so when you think, oh, I'm going to optimize, get out of my way, I need clear thinking time, I need to be left alone so I can solve the hard problem, and your team is going, how come you're icing me out? Right? How come you won't let me talk to you? You're not available. So I think just conceptually we have to start with the idea that we have the ability to apply different mental models or different patterns, and that the pattern that we've been applying, which has worked for us, is no longer good enough. There's this idea that what got you here won't get you there. And I think that's kind of where we are. So we have to be able to shift that thinking from I'm an individual contributor who brings value because of my brain and my two hands. We need to shift that thinking to say there might be a different measurement of success.
Yeah, that's really hard to do because you've had success in the past doing these certain things. And, your body and your mind keep saying, well, if you keep doing it, you're going to keep having success because that's what we know. But apparently that's not the case.
Well, I mean, it's nice when our idea about the world matches the world. It's unfortunate when our idea about the world doesn't match. And I think that's the thing. When I give this talk, one of the questions I ask is, if what you sincerely believed wasn't true, would you want to know? And it's easy for us to say, well, duh, of course I want to know. Well, really? Because what it fundamentally means is you've got to change. And are you willing to change? See, that's the hard part. Each of us has to kind of deal with, am I willing to take these closely held notions, and am I willing to re-examine them in light of different facts that might be available? So, nothing wrong with being the technical expert. You got to be the technical expert in order to get in, right? That's table stakes. You can't play the game. If you're super capable in lots of areas, but you don't know anything about technology, you're going to be an utter failure in technology leadership. You've got to understand that stuff. But you've got to stretch beyond those geek skills in order to kind of get there. And I think the next level that you have to think about, so that's level one, is really that individual contributor level. Level two is when we start to think about our role as a team member. Now, I have to confess that early in my career, my view of being a team member was, look, John, you give me the requirements and then get out of the way. What I need you for is to give me the requirements. Right. That's all I need you for.
That's not so much of a member, is it? It's more of still that individual mindset. But yeah, I get that, and I've worked with a lot of people like that. And there's a lot of people that are valuable in that role of, hey, let's just give this person the work and let them move on. But that's not how you grow as a leader.
That's right. And I think that there's some people who really, really strongly prefer to have that kind of role. And there's a place for that. But, think about Fred. Fred was on my team years ago, and he had been with the company for, I think, 30 years. And, you think, oh, he's an older guy. He's probably not that value add because, after all, technology marches forward. And Fred was phenomenal as a team member. He was great at people. He was great at communication. And I said, hey, Fred, I think you'd be great as a manager. And Fred said, I do not want that role. And I said, Fred, you'd be great at it. And he said, I don't care. And it was wise of him to see that. But I'll tell you something, John. Every project I put Fred on got better. Every single one. And he would say things like, well, I don't know Java, but, and then he would proceed to tell the Java developers what they were doing wrong. But he did it in such a way that he didn't make them mad, right? Because he was able to be a winsome, friendly, easygoing, communicative guy. He became he was kind of the glue that held some of the team together. And that was really, really powerful, even though he wasn't the official boss, and he was very clear that he didn't want to do that. He did add value. And I think that's powerful to be in that position, to be able to say, let me add value. And that's where we have to shift our thinking from being that individual contributor to being a team member. Mm-hmm. And we have to think about, one is too small a number to achieve greatness. That what we're trying to do here is we're trying to think about not just, okay, I will do work with you and I won't make you angry, which is one level of teamwork. Right? I can get along with you okay, but I don't really want to spend time with you. To go to where you add value and I add value. And I can be looking out for you in ways that you can't look out for yourself. And you can be looking out for me in ways that I can't look out for myself. And together we can do more. And I need to build those relationships. I'll tell you, I've met an awful lot of highly technical experts who are not interested in that level of performance. Mm-hmm. Those are the guys that you say, we'll email you the requirements and slide pizzas under the door, and you email the code to us, right?
Yep. I've worked with several of those, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think that it's not – so let's talk about that for a second. So you picture in your mind one of those people that you've worked with. You think about that person, okay? When you saw a need to engage that person, what was your response?
Usually fear.
Exactly. And I don't know much, but I know this. Fear does not lead to great performance.
That's right, yeah. It was one of the person I'm thinking about right now. It was basically you had to filter all of the emails that this person sent before they went to anybody outside of the team.
Right. That's right. That's right. Because it's not my fault they're stupid. I mean, I had a young woman who was working for one of my clients. I was doing some executive coaching, and they said, we need you to talk to this young lady. And I said, happy to do that. We sat down and we were chatting, and she couldn't understand why she was in trouble. She was sincerely befuddled about why the company was unhappy with her. And I said to her, look, you told your boss's boss that he was stupid. And she said, ouch. Yeah. And I said, and you did it in front of your peers and his peers. And she said, yeah, but what he did was stupid.
Yeah, that's not a good not a good
truth,
start.
truth is not an absolute defense,
Yeah.
right? And it may have been that his decision was a poor decision, but there's a better way to handle it that's reflective of that EQ. And I think that, we don't have to become super touchy-feely. We don't have to care a lot about what you feel, but we do have to recognize that people's feelings have a huge impact on their willingness to work with us. And so we have to develop some skills around how do I work as a team member, whether it's we all report to the same boss or we're all working on the same project to achieve the same outcomes. And we've got to figure out how can I be able to connect with other people. Now, for many of us, and I bet you, John, this may have been your experience, that you were a competent individual contributor. You stretched your capabilities to be able to work enough with other people to not make them angry. And then they said, hey, we need you to take over this team, right? You were a producer, and producers get promoted.
Yeah,
that's the pattern.
That's a nutshell. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
So that happens all the time. And we talk about the Peter principle, that people get promoted to their level of incompetence. They get to their level of competence and they get promoted one more time, and that's it.
Yep.
And the thing is, it's no wonder that we think that bosses are stupid. It's because they don't know what they're doing. And it's not a knock on those people who got promoted. It's actually a knock on the organization not equipping them. It'd be like saying, John, we want you to write some software, but we're not going to give you a laptop. A compiler? Why would you want a compiler, right? Internet access? Nah, you don't need that, right? And I think part of the situation is figuring out how do we begin to think differently. So we start with level one. We're thinking as an individual contributor, and I'm bringing the value myself personally. Then we go to level two, team member. And okay, now it's not just about me. One is too small a number to achieve greatness. And then we get to level three, and that now I'm the boss of a team. Now this requires a shift in our thinking. I was working with a lady who was in charge of a technical team, and she had been, much like your story that we talked about, she got promoted into this role, and she was a very productive individual contributor prior to holding that role. Well, when things got hard in her job as the boss, she retreated to the areas where she was most comfortable. And where she was most comfortable was in the individual contributor role, because she could be a rock star in that individual contributor role. But that doesn't actually work, because the company was expecting her to perform at like 4x, right? She's supposed to get productivity of all 4 team members that she had out. And when she would retreat to doing individual contributor work, she might, at best, was 1x, right? Even if she was really powerful in her role as an individual contributor. So really, even if she was stellar, she was still 75% below performance-wise where the company expected her to be. And I think that's the thing we have to think about. We have to shift our thinking to a different place, that my job is actually not to do the work. My job is not to do the work.
I think that's one thing that I've noticed a pattern, that if you ever want to get better at something or grow at something, you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. You have to kind of go through that phase of, this is not going to be comfortable for a while, and until you get to that next level. I mean, the same thing's true when you're working out or running or trying to eat healthy or raising kids. I mean, you have to get used to being uncomfortable for a period of time in order to grow.
Well, that's true. One of my mentors says that that confusion is a requirement for growth. Confusion is a requirement for growth, because if the new thing fits exactly into our old model, we're really not being stretched. And so if we want to be able to get to a new place, we have to be willing to stretch and do different things. Now, in my situation, when I began to realize that becoming a leader was something that was possible, I went to my boss and I said, hey, I want to go to this leadership training. And my boss said, Tom, we're a technology organization. we don't need any leadership stuff. And, at that point, I could have said, well, okay, and gone back and signed up for whatever the technical certification class was next. And I thought about that, and I said, but that's not going to get me where I want to go. That's not the thing. And so, thankfully, my wife was very accommodating. I said to her, hey, I think this growth in this area is going to be really powerful and useful and helpful for me career-wise, but the company's not going to fund it. So can we take some of our money and put it into me traveling, me paying for tuition, me going to workshops and seminars, me buying books, me buying programs online, so that I could then stretch my capabilities and get to the place I need to be. And thankfully, my wife was all about that. But for many of us, we sort of depend on our bosses to decide what we're going to get trained in. That we're kind of reliant on that. And I like what Jim Rohn says. He says, if you don't design your own life plan, chances are you're going to fall into somebody else's plan.
Yep, that's well said.
And you know what they got planned for you? Not much. And I think that's part of our role is figuring out, I need to develop my influence skills. I need to be able to grow my team and be able to challenge my team members to say, hey, you need to find a way to get along better with the other people on the team. You need to find a way, don't go telling your boss's boss that he's an idiot in front of his peers, right? That's, but that kind of idea. And my job, my success criteria, my self-evaluation comes not from what code did I commit, or what systems did I implement, or what projects did I personally lead. But my definition of success comes from how did I help my team operate better as a team? How did I help my team productivity increase dramatically? And I think that's a shift. So we talked about individual, we talked about team member, we talked about team leader when you get to be a boss. Then level 4 is team builder. And that's all about succession. John Maxwell says a leader's success is measured by succession. What happens when you leave an organization? I had some really good successes when I was working in the Fortune 500. I moved up the ranks and I had a team that was working for me and I really enjoyed that. And I stayed in touch with my team members after I left. And one of them about 4 years after I left said, Tom, after you left, it's like the magic left. Now, I'm not magic,
good, though, doesn't it?
Well, yes. But as a leader, I think I had functioned at level 3, but I hadn't functioned at level 4.
Yeah.
I hadn't trained and equipped my team to be able to step in to become level 3 leaders after I moved on.
Yeah, I had a mentor that used to tell me that, if you really want to be a good leader, you need to have people behind you that when you move up or move out, they easily step into your role and there's no loss. And that's really tough because you have that scarcity mindset that says, I'm replaceable and I don't want to be replaceable. How can I, get to that point? So
that's right.
So yeah, it's a difficult thing.
But here's the thing, that our capabilities make room for us. That when we grow our capabilities, it makes a space for us to do other things. And I think that, to your point about scarcity mindset, I think you're right, that many of us do struggle with that scarcity mindset. And yet, I think there is a lot of value in saying, wait a minute, when I stretch my skills and I'm no longer limited by whatever my limits were when I started this role, maybe I can move to a different role. Now, sometimes that's in the same organization. Sometimes it's in a different organization. And I think back as I grew through my career, I had multiple career transitions. And while there were days in the new jobs that I felt like, this is hard, never once did I feel like, I made a huge mistake. I should have gone back. That it was part of that growth. It was part of that stretch into that space. And I think for the, if you're at level 3, you're running a team, you're doing a good job getting your team members to develop, you've got to be thinking about how do I help develop the next team leaders? How do I help develop those people who can develop people? Because our ultimate impact, our succession impact is going to be how do we inspire people and equip people so they can perform at a higher level long term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the true measure of how well of a leader you were in that role.
Right, and it's not something that's obvious, but it is something that's important. And I think that what we have to do is we have to recognize kind of where. Think about folks who are listening to this podcast. Where are you on your journey? Are you thinking, I am a rock star as an individual contributor. I knock it out of the park. They call me every time bad stuff happens, and I jump in and I'm a superhero and I fix it. That's okay. But what happens is there's a point in your career where you don't move up anymore. Yeah. And I remember I sat down with Fred and I went to my boss because I was supposed to give Fred's performance review. And I went to my boss and I said, hey, Fred is already at the highest level in his job family that he's allowed to be in. He's already at the highest pay that he's allowed to have in that job family. You want me to sit down and tell him, he's an A player. You want me to sit down and tell him that he's not going to make any more money? And he said, yeah, go tell Fred he's not going to make
That's tough.
It is. And I think that's, it's a reality. Now, Fred Fred was content with what he was doing because he didn't want to have to be bothered with that other stuff. And so he was okay with that. But my point is that there is a limit. Nobody as a web developer is making $1 million a year. I don't care how good you are. There's a limit to how much you can earn.
Yep.
And I think that's part of the thing is figuring out nobody buys technology for technology. I mean, if your bank could run without any computers, they would. But what they found is that it's a whole lot more efficient for them to have computers than not have computers. And so they don't care about the technology. They care about the output. What can I get with that? And I think as technologists, we have to see ourselves as delivering value, the things that really matter to our customers. And how do we reframe our thinking? And that's really this kind of idea, these levels of thinking, is recognizing where do I bring value and what am I doing that matters? At level 1, it's me, and then, level 2, we start thinking it's about we.
Yeah.
And then level 3 is when we start to say, okay, how do we begin to grow that team capability? And tragically, most people in management roles are level 2 thinkers. They just have never had that paradigm shift. So if you're listening to the podcast today and you're a level 2 thinker, what I want you to do is think about what if definition of success was different? What if you could define success as being the productivity of the team as opposed to your individual contributions? What if you could be looking at how could you take those people who are individual contributors today and help them to start thinking about what would it mean to connect and contribute as a team member? And that's where I think you'll start to see some of the differences happen and some of the impact of the team. And the thing is, when you do that, the power of the team multiplies. You get so much more capacity. And right now, if you're not doing those things, you're leaving capacity on the table because you say, well, this person's a low performer, but I'm not going to be bothered with them. I'll just give more work to the high performers.
Yeah, I know it's really easy to do, especially when you're in like a tight deadline or a crisis mode. But whenever you do that and you set that precedence and that pattern of always dumping on the high performer and not helping bring up the low performer, you do two things. One, you invalidate any trust that you have in a low performer, which makes them not want to, achieve more. And you overload the high performer, makes them want to leave and not come back.
Exactly. It's a double whammy, right? Yeah. And I think there comes a time where there are differences in capacity for different team members. Mm-hmm. That's a reality. But that doesn't mean that we should say to somebody who is a lower performer, hey, stop trying. Our job is to say, how can I help you? I used to tell my team members this. My job is to help you be the best you can be. And that doesn't always mean that the conversations we're going to have are going to be fantastic and fun for you.
Yeah. So when you talk about those tough conversations and having those conversations, what are some things that we can do to make those a little bit easier?
Well, I think the number one thing you can do, if you need to give somebody some negative feedback, the number one thing you can do is think about what you're going to say before it starts coming out of your mouth. Most of us ignore and ignore and ignore until we get mad, and then we just explode. Bleh. We say something, and it might be more harsh and it might be more painful than we intend for it to be. Mm-hmm. And I think if you think about what are you going to say, and there are 3 rules that I use for when you're going to give feedback. It needs to be direct. Yep. Hey, John, the other day when we were in the meeting with Fred, we had this problem, right? It needs to be honest and say, that conversation, it didn't go as well as it could have gone because I think Fred left pretty upset with you, right? But it also needs to be kind, direct, honest, and kind. Because, just like the young lady I was mentioning earlier who told her boss's boss that he was stupid, right? That was direct, and it was honestly how she felt. But it wasn't kind. And I think, so we think about what are we going to say? Now, I don't mean sugarcoat it or BS or make stuff up. I don't mean that at all. But you can be very specific and say, in this situation, when you did this thing, it had this impact. And that will make it a whole lot easier for you and for the other person, because then they don't say, John, sometimes people think you, or you tend to, or you're not good at, then it's just this sort of blanket kind of character assassinating criticism of the person themselves. And really what we're generally trying to address is behavior.
Yeah, and I think, right? I know from my perspective, as soon as I hear something that's not kind, as you said, then my defense mechanisms come up and I no longer listen to the actual feedback.
That's exactly right.
It's all goes right over my head, and I have no idea what they actually said. And that's not a good approach, and it's not a good way to actually learn anything.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that, to your point about feedback, one of the things that I try to teach people to do is to ask the question, would you like some feedback? Because there's some times where I'm super stressed, I'm right in the middle of a project, I'm trying to deliver something, you come to me and want to give me some feedback. Not a good time, right? I got a headache, I'm not feeling well, I'm thinking about going home sick, and you come over and you dump some more stuff on me, and I'm like, dude, you stink. I hate you. Right? But if you could say to somebody, would you like some feedback? Often they'll say yes. In fact, what we find is that employees very, very, very often want feedback. The stats show that employees want negative feedback far more than no feedback. And they even want negative feedback more than they want positive feedback because they don't know what they're doing is wrong. And if we don't tell them that what they're doing is wrong or not meeting our expectations, I realized after I had worked for a small company for a long time and eventually left, I realized I spent a lot of time in fear when I was working there. I was afraid that I was making my boss unhappy because my boss wasn't ever giving me any feedback until he was angry. And then he would dump, on me. And so then I try to figure out, okay, how do I make that never happen again? And then we go back to fear is not a great link to high performance.
You're right. Because I think fear prevents you from doing all that you can do because you figure out where that limit is, and that's where you stay because you know that's a safe zone.
That's right.
I don't want to push past that and possibly step into a landmine or something like that that's going to make my boss explode on me.
That's exactly right. And I think that for the painful thing is that because most people who are in management positions have not had any training in these ideas, they're really not equipped to perform. And it's unfortunate because they have a lot of capacity and don't have simple, practical tools. And I think that's one of the things that I've been really excited about in the work that I do is I'm looking at applied behavioral psychology, what actually works. What are the things that actually make a difference? And then how can I remember to do those things? How can I keep it simple and bite-sized and remember to do it so that, I'll give you an example. I set up a system when I was working for a company. I was responsible for about a third of the company, and I would have the senior executive team meeting, and then a couple hours later, I would have a team meeting. And I could filter the stuff that was appropriate to share with my team from the senior executive meeting and bring it to the team and give them heads up about what's management thinking, what direction might we go, what are the options that are ahead of us, all those kinds of things. Now, I couldn't share everything because it wasn't appropriate for me to share everything, but I could share some things. And we got to a point where we needed to make a major decision in the company. And the other leaders at the senior executive team said, we can't begin to implement this. Nobody knows that we're thinking of this. And I said, my team does. They said, what did you tell them? I've been telling them for the last 6 months that we have these trends that are happening and these things are out there and these factors may play into a change in the needs of the organization. Now, it's not because I had tremendous insight or because I'm smart. No, that's not it. It's because I had a system that allowed me to meet with my team after I met with the executive team, and I could say, okay, what did we talk about today? How can I filter that to the appropriate level of sharing and then communicate that appropriately to the team? And that's something, these are the types of tools and the types of techniques that people don't have because nobody's ever shared it with them.
So how would one go about getting some of these techniques and some of these and learning about how to be a better leader? How do I change my mindset, my ways of thinking, and how do I get this training?
Well, thanks for asking that. I think, one of the things I've got, I think there are 30 episodes of a podcast that I've done called Becoming a Geek Leader. And I think that's helpful for folks to think about very practical techniques. And if you check that out from
great name, by the way.
You check that out from BrightHillGroup.com, bright like the sun, hill like a mountain, and group like a group of people, BrightHillGroup.com. You can pick those up, and I tried to make those evergreen so that if I recorded them 2 years ago, they are very relevant to you today. And then I've also I've set up a web page on BrightHillGroup.com/ageekleader for listeners here. Some things that they can take away. One is an infographic of the 4 levels of thinking as a geek leader. Another is a description about some offsites that I can do for teams, so I can take your leadership team offsite and help do some programs. And a third thing is something I'm really excited about. It's called the John Maxwell Team Leadership Game, and it's a really fun, interactive 1 to 2 hour workshop in the form of a game. The outcome from that is that you will learn about your leadership team, and you'll learn about specifically what the gaps are in the leadership team's skills. and come up with some specific actionable ideas about what you can do to close some of those gaps. And so there's a promotional video about that on that same webpage.
Well, that's awesome. I'm going to link that up in the show notes, and I appreciate you putting that together for our listeners. I'm sure they'll enjoy that. So how are some other ways that people can get in touch with you and listen to your podcast and find out more about, I know you specialize in communication for geeks as well. How can they find out more about that information?
Well, the website, BrightHillGroup.com, has got all kinds of stuff about executive coaching and about training programs that I do. Also, would be happy to speak with folks. My phone number's out there. I'd love to have somebody give me a call. And if you've got something you're working on or something that you've been trying to figure out, give me a call. I'd be glad to kind of brainstorm with you and see if I can help you come up with a direction that would take you the right place. One thing I almost forgot. One of the challenges that organizations face is they almost never have a line item in the budget that specifically improve our team's leadership. And it's, so you say, well, gosh, I need to hire somebody, but I don't know how to, we don't have a line item for that. I can send them to certification training, but I don't. Well, I put together an ebook on how to get budget, how to find budget for your leadership training. And it's filled with recent research on the benefits of this, and it also lists some of the costs, and it's got the sources and everything. We basically walk through what are some questions you might have about what leadership training looks like, what are some questions your boss is going to ask you. If you go to your boss and say, hey, boss, there's this great idea that I want to do, and your boss is going to say, wait, what? I tell you what kind of questions your boss is going to ask you. And then we talk about some of the costs and some things that might be relevant. That's also linked on the same page.
Awesome. So
your listeners can jump right in there and download that, and that's no cost at all for that. And I hope it's valuable for folks.
Oh, yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much. And as always, I appreciate you bringing so much content.
It's hard to stop sometimes, right?
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Awesome. Thanks so much, Tom.
Good deal. Thank you, sir.